Welcome, everybody. I've got Steve here, and we're here to talk about all the things that built the Star Wars universe. So, we talk about Star Wars CCG all the time on this channel, but we also want to talk about the Star Wars role playing game, which seeded a lot of the lore. And Steve has a working theory about how this might be one of the most influential books as far as building up
Yeah.
Star Wars and the universe and the background. So, Steve, thanks for putting this together, man. I'm really excited to dive into this stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on for this, Matt. I've been looking forward to talking about this one for a while. We're going to talk about the original Star Wars role-playing game by West End Games that ran from 1987 to 1999. Uh, so, as many of you know, there's actually been three different distinct Star Wars role-playing games. There's a later one that Wizards of the Coast made, and then the current sort of active one by Fantasy Flight Games. But we won't talk about those today. We're talking about the West End games from the 80s. And this one is like, it's we have to like take ourselves back in time to 1987 when it came out. It's 4 years after Return of the Jedi. Hadn't been much Star Wars material in those intervening 4 years. Star Wars is kind of dormant. And then this game comes along, about 10 years after Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role playing game. It's a paper and pencil tabletop role playing game. And this game really it took the Star Wars franchise from a series of three movies and a smattering of other stuff that was mostly forgotten, uh, and then turned it into an entire universe by fleshing out um, the characters, the planets, a lot of the background stuff that makes an actual built universe. And it has an incredibly important legacy that we'll talk about as we go along.
That's a great intro. Okay, so going from three movies that were
Yeah,
well received to an entire
yeah,
universe that we enjoy today. So,
yeah. Yeah, and
um,
like in '87, it's like you don't have Disney Plus to stream these. You don't have DVD or Blu-ray copies. Most people don't really watch Star Wars that often, so this game kind of filled the void of creating more adventures. So I guess yeah, we could dig it into whenever you're ready.
yeah, let's get into it.
I want to just very briefly talk about how this game plays. This will not be a full rules primer, but uses something called the D6 system, which West End Games pioneered, and I think they used it for one or two other games, like the Ghostbusters role-playing game before this. Superficially, right, it's similar to Dungeons and Dragons or any other role-playing game, but it's very, very streamlined, very simple. I should say that there's a couple that West End Games produced a revised version in I want to say 94, maybe it was 96, but like in the mid 90s that increased the complexity quite a bit. But this original version is extremely straightforward. So basically, you have these character templates, and they like this one here's smuggler. There's a bunch more. There's like bounty hunter, scout, and so forth. And it has six skills: dexterity, knowledge, mechanical. Sorry, these are six attributes: dexterity, knowledge, mechanical, perception, strength, and technical. Each of the templates, they have a dice code. Here it says like 3D plus one, 2D plus one. When you're trying to do something that involves dexterity or knowledge, you're going to roll that many dice and add any modifier to it, and that's your roll for it. And then you compare it to whatever target number you're looking for to exceed. And then for skills, you can there's a number of skill codes underneath these attributes, like related to them. You can spend additional dice to like when you're building your character, you get 7 additional dice, and you can begin with a baseline of like dexterity 3D plus one, then add additional dice to improve it so that your actual like the skills under it are better than the base attribute. That's like almost the entire mechanic for the game. Combat is you using like your blaster skill or your brawling skill, and you don't have any hit points in this game, which is
Mm.
crazy. It's like you if you get hit based upon like the range you are away from the attacker, then you can roll make a strength roll and you compare the damage dice from the attacker to see if it exceeds, and then you'll either be stunned, wounded, incapacitated, or mortally wounded. And that's pretty much the game. It plays very fast, very cinematic.
I
Uh,
think that's what you have to do with a lot of early gaming. It's like it has to be fast, otherwise people just lose interest because gaming
yeah,
wasn't normalized.
yeah.
Just Okay, but what's
I
some of
should
the
say that this
lore?
game came out when I was 2 years old, so I was obviously not playing it back then. And I got into the later Wizards of the Coast version of Star Wars RPG, but I'd always wanted to get back into this, and so yeah, a couple of years ago, Fantasy Flight Games produced a replica of the first two books, the core game book and the source book that we'll talk about, called the Star Wars Source Book, and they both come in this like really cool slipcover. So I got that, and that's the version that I've been using. But anyway, let's talk about lore more, because this game is really famous for the lore introduced. Um, because it had to like explain a lot about how things worked in the Star Wars universe in a mechanical way, so you could role play it. One of the things it got into is the Force. Um, it created this idea that there are three core Force skills, and those are control, sense, and alter, which I think Star Wars CCG players will be very familiar with those names. And it sort of delineated subsets of Force skills underneath them. So, like, control is like manipulating your own body in ways, increasing your healing. Sense is like precognition, perception. Alter is manipulating others, including like messing with their minds and stuff. And there's another like more complicated Force skills under those. Um, it talked. The game got into like, how does a lightsaber work? And it's like, well, there's focusing crystals inside of it, and you have to build it, and the selection of the crystal matters, and all this, which is stuff that later is referenced in other Star Wars lore. Um, Aliens and planets are a big part of this. So a lot of aliens are given names for the first time in the Star Wars source book, which is this like the second book that came out in '87. That was mostly background material. So, like for example, the Ithorians. It mentions how like they're like peaceful, herding people. They speak with like a stereoscopic two mouths instead of their head, which is interesting because like a lot of this stuff is later passed into other Star Wars media. Even Skeleton Crew, which came out a few weeks ago, there's like an Ithorian kid speaking in like one of the classrooms, and he speaks with two mouths, and you can hear them both speaking at the same time. That's like made up for this role playing game in '87. So it's like had that really long legacy. Twi'leks are named here. The Wookiee planet had been seen briefly in the Star Wars Holiday Special, that's named here as Kashyyyk with three Ys. Some fun stuff about the Celestins. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I guess like when Disney decided to buy the IP, they're like, this stuff is too indispensable to get rid of. Like a lot of the extended edition novels, they became legends, right? But
Right, right.
this stuff that some guy, I'm sure he, had some Lucas art
Yes.
permissions or whatever, but just was
Yeah.
like Twi'leks, and George Lucas is like, I'm too busy with Indiana Jones. Like, that's fine, right? Because that's what he was doing,
Yes.
right? Yeah, I guess he was.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of this was written for the Star Wars source book by this writer named Bill Slavichek, who would be really interesting to interview him at some point, because he wrote a number of different source books for this game, and he wrote Coast Star Wars role playing game as well. And I think he personally made up a lot of this stuff that was later adopted. And you mentioned that like when Disney took over, I think it's because this is interesting because in the reprint of this game, there's a foreword to it by Pablo Hidalgo, who is the head of the Lucasfilm Story Group under Disney, who basically maintains the new canon. And from the forward, it makes it sound like he actually played this game in the '80s. So I think he personally has a lot of respect for this game, and that may have been why he was pretty conservative when they reset the canon to keep a lot of this in canon, slowly reintroduce it.
It feels like this canon's a lot harder to change than, Luke and Mara Jade had a baby. This is like changing species names, changing planet names. It's like, well, people are really used to the planet Kashyyyk. It's in like 20 video games,
Right.
right? And Twi'leks are all over the place. And so it
Yeah.
feels like a little more foundational than some of the stuff where like people had adventures 20 years after the movies.
And I think it's like pretty solid stuff. It's not really embarrassing. It kind of makes sense. It's kind of fun, kind of it creates like a fleshed out universe. So you can see why they keep it. Whereas like in certain comic book continuities, maybe things are we set them more readily. I also know this book is like it's very sly, and like they have a lot of like witty stuff in it. Some of it's written from the perspective of in universe. Like here is a decree from Sorosub Corporation fellow Celestins on the 62nd day of the Celeste year. It's about how basically the Celestin government has been dissolved, and Sorosub Corporation that makes land speeders is now running the planet at the behest of Emperor Palpatine, which I find to be like really kind of funny.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the times where like corporations play a large role in the Star Wars lore, because it's not always. Sometimes it feels like it's just like, oh yeah, corporations don't. And that's like the Space Guild is actually incredibly powerful, and you're like, who?
Right.
The Soros Corporation? That's
Yeah. Oh, I wonder if that's probably before George Soros was a big name. So
probably. I think different Soros.
Soros sub. That's I think that's the company in the lore that manufactured Luke's land speeder. I think, which I think might have been just made up for this game. Okay, bounty hunters. All the bounty hunters' backstories come from this game. They produced a book called the Galaxy Guide to Empire Strikes Back. So I think a lot of the bounty hunters had names already, maybe from either the credits or the script or the counter action figures. But here is where they explain like, why is Dengar wearing a giant head bandage? Well, it's because he had a run in with Han Solo on a swoop bike and got injured, and so has a grudge against Han. That's just like they made up for the game. Zuckuss, the whole thing about him being a Finesman, Forlom, a reprogrammed protocol droid. The Boba Fett stuff's interesting. It mentions like he wears a weapon-covered armored spacesuit similar to those favored by a group of warriors from Mandalore system who were defeated by the Jedi Knights during the Clone Wars. It's unknown if Fett was actually a member of that group or later found and adopted the armor as his own. It's kind of like some of that stuff is still influential in canon. It's a little bit different. It's kind of cool though.
Did they
think
use their names? Is this the first time they've been named, like Zuckuss, Forlom?
I don't think so. I think Zuckuss is he may be named in in like either the script or some of the notes, because I think his action figure from the 80s earlier on has the name. But definitely the lore of them. And then like Slave One calling it a fire spray class vessel made by Kuat Engineering. I think that's all comes from this game right here.
It's now called Fire Spray, Steve.
Now it is the fire spray. That's right. What name came from here? Speaking of ships and technology, a lot of stuff about like Incom Corporation made up for this game. Steiner Fleet Systems comes from this game, and then just broadly, the source book talks a lot about like why doesn't the Empire use X-wings, and it has a whole thing in here about the Incom design team being rebel sympathizers who defect to the Alliance, and they take the plans with them, and so the Empire can't really recreate the X-wing. I think that's really interesting. Like, you've got this cool ship model from the original trilogy, but there's not really any explanation for why one side's using it, not the other. But yeah, it fleshes all that out.
Yeah, I was actually, as you asked that question, I was like, I don't know the answer. Why do they like ties seem so bad? Like, why?
Yeah.
Does everyone use a TIE fighter?
Then it's got this interesting thing here about like the lineage of TIE fighters. Some of this not canon anymore, but some, like Steiner Fleet Systems is still is in the new Disney canon now. The name's TIE/LN. That's kind of pretty much accepted. That comes from here. Yeah, I'll take a second to talk about the first adventure they published called Tatooine Manhunt. This is a pre-published adventure that came out in '88. It's really cool. I really want to run this at some point. It's about how the player characters are a group of rebels who go to Tatooine to search for a presumed dead hero of the Old Republic named Adar Talon, who is the namesake for the Talon Roll maneuver from Star Wars CCG and then later Star Wars canon. The main villain is Jodo Kast. He's a bounty hunter who looks just like Boba Fett, and he comes from this because they wanted to have a Boba Fett stand-in. But because the game is set in the canon, you can't actually kill Boba Fett, and you need to be able to defeat the enemy. So they created Jodo Kast, who's like pretending to be Boba Fett, or like trading off of his reputation. I think it's kind
But
of
he's
cool.
Notably not a Mandalorian. I'm looking like it's interesting. I wonder where that word came from. Right? When was that introduced?
I think the term Mandalorian was kicked around Empire Strikes Back time, either in the script or the novelization. There's nothing more about it other than that. And I think it's possible this game is the first time that There's a reference to a group of armored warriors from the Mandalore system who were involved in the Clone Wars. I think that comes from here.
Oh yeah, I see it right there.
Yeah.
Group of
Yeah, so
warriors.
Joe Cost, he kicks around in the role playing game for a long time, and then he appears in some other stuff as well. Just a couple other fun things like Spaceport Speeders being the company that Luke sold his land speeder to is in here. Labria, who a lot of Star Wars players know as the horned alien, he's from the Cantina. He is named as an NPC in this adventure. So yeah, pretty fun stuff. I think
I
that's
really like in the image you see a cloud car, or what I think is a cloud car right
yeah.
there. You might instead of ID88.
Yeah, so a couple things with this cover, right? So this is it's on Tatooine, but it's pretty clearly this is an image of Cloud City. That's because they're using a Ralph McQuarrie painting, the original concept artist from the Star Wars trilogy. A lot of Ralph McQuarrie art appears in these books, and it's really beautiful stuff and influential in sort of the general style of this game. And all the bounty hunters are on the cover, but actually none of them appear in the game. Every one of them has a stand-in version so that you can battle and defeat them if you want to. So there's IG-72, it's IG-88, and I forget the Trandoshan and the Gand and the Protocol droid. But
Yeah, no
yeah,
Bosk. It's like Mosk or something.
yeah, he's a different name. I forget. But yeah, anyway, yeah, so the vibe of this game, it's very like um, it has a lot of humor in this game, which is sort of befitting of the slightly silly style of Star Wars. It had almost a bit of a DIY punk vibe as well, too, as opposed to more polished games that are out today, like the sketch art and stuff. I think is pretty cool. Yeah, in terms of the legacy of it, a lot of people know that when Timothy Zahn was hired to write Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and Last Command, the Thrawn trilogy, the first trilogy of canon Star Wars novels in the 90s. Uh, Basically, the public Lucasfilm sent him every book that West End Games had made, and they're like, just use this stuff as the background to flesh out your novels. And so what you'll see when you read it is a lot of stuff that comes. Zahn is so I think it references Soro Sub Corporation. It references a lot of these different things in here that come straight from this game. And then the game in turn produced source books based on the Thrawn trilogy and most of the major expanded universe novels of the 90s. Um, so yeah, this game really sort of built and it sort of set the tone for how I would say the 90s Star Wars novels felt. The Star Wars customizable card game, which we love, it has like a dedication. It has like a special thanks to West End Games Star Wars RPG for providing a lot of the lore. And in many ways, when you're reading through this game, you feel like in some ways like Star Wars CCG is kind of adapting this RPG to the tabletop with like Sense and Alter and a lot of the stuff that's just straight up just brought into the card game.
Um,
Yeah, current Disney canon still influenced by it. Just one of many examples. In Andor, the Mon Mothma character is she like talks a little bit about her planet Chandrilla, the culture there, her being like a Chandrillan sort of aristocrat. That's from this source book and names her planet as Chandrilla, and it gives a little bit of backstory about her being an aristocrat from that planet.
that's the kind of stuff in Star Wars that I really enjoy. Is like getting into like, oh, this is not actually like a egalitarian galaxy that like even among the heroes, like yeah, she's a wealthy aristocrat from a good
Yeah,
family. Most people aren't from good families. Most people are poor.
yeah,
It's like
right, right, yeah.
well, this is really fun to dive into. This is going to be the start of kind of a series when I do exploring the history and lore of Star Wars and kind of where a lot of this stuff comes from. You'll see this is part one. We'll be
Yep.
out with more parts as we kind of put them together. But Steve, any kind of final thoughts here on the Star Wars role-playing game by West End Games?
Yeah, I just say that if you're interested in giving this a look, it's pretty easy to pick this stuff up on eBay or used gaming sites like Noble Knights Games. Some of it is expensive-ish. I mean, the games are pretty old. You can get this reprint version for under $100. It includes the two main books. The rest of the source books are a little pricey, like $50+ range. But this is the internet. There may or may not be PDFs of many of these floating around, and they're well out of print. So, that's another option. But
Use your
collecting
imagination, guys. That's the key to all role playing and find things on the internet. But thanks for hanging out, everybody. That's all we got for today. We'll catch you guys later. And a big shout out to Scott Church at Category 1 Games for continuing to support the channel. Check out his store for some good stuff. Like, subscribe, and we'll catch you guys later.